I came back after 2 days away expecting nothing more dramatic than feeding my goats and checking the irrigation lines. Instead, what I found nearly made me laugh out loud because it was either that or start swinging an axe. A brand new steel fence shiny as a prison gate stretched across the only entrance to my farm. The padlock was thick enough to hold back an army, and a sign screamed in bold letters, "Private HOA property, no trespassing." That's right. According to my brand new neighbors in Willow Creek Meadows, I was now trespassing on my own land, all 40 acres of it locked away like some kind of outlaw hideout. But here's the thing about me, I don't scare easy. I've run into burning houses and dragged men out alive. So if an HOA thought a fence and a fancy sign could box me in, they had no idea who they were up against. Before we dive into how this war played out, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. You'd think 40 acres of farmland would buy a man some peace. Wide pastures, old oak trees swaying in the breeze, a big red barn that had stood longer than most of the houses in town that was my little corner of freedom. For years, nobody bothered me. I kept to myself, sold my hay, raised my animals, and minded my own business. That all changed the moment Willow Creek Meadows sprouted up next door. At first, it looked harmless enough, rows of cookie-cutter houses, freshly poured sidewalks, and glossy flyers advertising exclusive community living. I knew what that meant, HOA. 3 letters scarier to me than IRS, FBI, or TNT. I'd seen enough news stories and heard enough horror tales, but I figured, hey, my land's my land. They can't touch me. Right, turns out I underestimated just how far an HOA will go when they set their sights on something they want. It started with letters. Real polite at first, typed on fancy letterhead with gold trim. "Mr. Bates, we noticed your barn paint appears faded and inconsistent with community aesthetic guidelines. Please repaint within 14 days to avoid penalties." I almost choked on my coffee when I read that one. Community guidelines, I didn't sign a thing with Willow Creek Meadows. I wasn't part of their little cookie-cutter kingdom. My farm stood on county land, independent and free. I tossed the letter straight into the wood stove. 2 days later, another one showed up. This time about my tractors. All machinery must be shielded from public view to preserve neighborhood beauty. They wanted me to build a fence around my equipment or pay a fine. I laughed so hard I scared the goats. Those tractors had been parked out there since before Willow Creek Meadows was a glimmer in a developer's eye. Then came the warnings about my chicken coop. Unauthorized structures may be subject to removal. I built that coop with my own 2 hands back when gas was under $2 a gallon. The hens weren't impressed either. At first I thought it was just some automated nonsense like spam mail. But soon I noticed strangers poking around the edges of my property. Men in neon vests with survey poles. A lady crouching in the ditch snapping pictures with her phone. I marched out there and asked what business they had on my land. They just smirked and said they were assessing boundaries. That's when I met her for the first time, Natalia Crawford, president of the Willow Creek Meadows HOA, queen of clipboards, with a smile that could curdle milk. She showed up one morning in a tailored blazer that didn't belong anywhere near a dirt road. She introduced herself like a politician on the campaign trail, hand extended perfume strong enough to knock a mule sideways. "Mr. Bates," she said sweetly, "I'm here to help integrate your property into our community standards." I just stared at her. "Ma'am, my property isn't part of your community," she chuckled like I'd told a joke. "Not yet, but you'll find it's much easier if you cooperate. After all, we value order here. Clean lines, proper appearances. We wouldn't want your rustic lifestyle to hurt property values, would we?" Rustic lifestyle. That's what she called my farm, the place I poured 20 years of sweat into. I told her politely that she could march her clipboard right back to whatever boardroom she crawled out of. Her smile slipped for half a second, then returned sharper. "You'll be hearing from us," she said, heels clicking away across my gravel drive. And boy, did I ever. Within a week, I had a stack of notices thicker than my Sunday paper. One claimed my barn roof reflected too much sunlight. Another said my hay bales were unsightly obstructions. The wildest one, that my rooster violated their noise ordinance. Try telling a rooster to keep it down before sunrise. The strangest thing was how quickly it escalated. These weren't just silly letters anymore. I started noticing HOA board members driving past real slow in their SUVs, snapping photos. My mailbox filled with glossy newsletters bragging about new community acquisitions. And then one night I saw stakes hammered into the ground along my fence line with bright orange flags. Survey markers. I yanked one up, marched over to the nearest SUV, parked on the road, and threw it in the passenger seat. The guy inside just smirked and said, "Enjoy it while you can, old man." The board has plans for this land. Then he drove off. That's when I knew this wasn't just harassment, it was a takeover. Natalia and her cronies didn't just want me to follow their rules, they wanted my farm. See, developers build HOAs like chess players, setting traps 3 moves ahead. They don't care if you've been on your land for decades. If they can box you in, make life miserable, bury you under legal threats, eventually you'll crack, you'll sell, you'll move, and they'll flip your land into more houses, more dues, more power. But what Natalia didn't understand was that I don't crack. I've pulled men out of burning wrecks with smoke in my lungs and fire chewing at my boots. You think a few letters and a smug smile are going to break me? No, Natalia had just declared war. And if there's one thing I learned in the fire service, it's this: sometimes you fight flames with water and sometimes you let them burn themselves out. The next time I saw her, she was standing at the new subdivision entrance under a big shiny sign, "Welcome to Willow Creek Meadows, a Natalia Crawford community." She waved at me like we were old friends. I just tipped my hat. Inside, though, I was already planning my first counterstrike. Because if they thought a few letters were the worst they could throw at me, they hadn't seen anything yet. You'd think, after the barrage of letters and surprise visits, Natalia Crawford and her merry band of clipboard crusaders would have taken a hint. But no. When it comes to HOAs, no is just their favorite word flipped inside out. And Natalia was the queen of not yet. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging. Not the usual kind like the ring of my goats kicking the trough or the screech of my old tractor when it needed oil. No, this was sharper, deliberate. The kind of noise that makes your gut twist before your brain even catches up. I walked down my gravel driveway, coffee in hand, and froze. Right there, bolted straight across the entrance to my farm, was a brand new steel gate. Heavy bars, chain link panels, padlock the size of a brick. And stretching out from either side of that gate, a fence gleaming in the morning sun like a silver knife carving my land from the road. I thought maybe I was dreaming, but then I saw them. 3 HOA board members in polos and khakis hard hats perched crooked on their heads watching the final welds like generals at war. And standing in the middle clipboard, clutched like a royal scepter, was Natalia Crawford herself. She spotted me and smiled, that sharp politician smile of hers. "Good morning, Mr. Bates. I hope you like the improvements." "Improvements," I barked, pointing at the barrier. "That's my driveway. My only driveway." She tapped her clipboard. "Cool as you please." "Correction. That strip of land 5 feet by 5 feet was recently purchased by the Willow Creek Meadows HOA, which means this gate, this fence, and this property are under our jurisdiction. If you wish to pass, you'll need to apply for an access permit and pay the associated fees." I laughed. Out loud. It wasn't even a choice. The sound just came out of me, rough and disbelieving. "You're telling me I have to pay you to walk onto my own farm?" Her smile didn't falter. "Not to walk. To trespass across HOA property, yes. Unless, of course, you'd like to attend our next board meeting. We can discuss options for integrating your farm into our community. Membership has its privileges." I swear to you, for a moment, I saw red. Not metaphorically. I mean the whole world tinted scarlet, like my brain was about to boil over. It took everything I had not to snap that clipboard in half. Instead, I leaned close enough that she caught a whiff of barn dust and sweat. "Lady," I said, voice low, "you just built yourself a fence around the wrong man." Behind her, one of the board members, some slick-haired guy with sunglasses too big for his face, chimed in. "Better get used to it, Bates. Rules are rules. You don't comply, you don't get out," Natalia added. "From this point forward, any attempt to cross this property without authorization will be treated as trespassing. We will pursue legal action." Legal action. That was her favorite weapon. I could already picture the smug letterhead stamped with words like violation and penalty. But here's the thing. About threats, they only work if the other guy doesn't know how to fight back. I stared at that fence for a long minute. The welds were fresh, still warm. The posts dug deep into the soil, lined with gravel like it had been planned weeks in advance. This wasn't some impulsive act. Natalia had schemed this, plotted it down to the inch. And me, I was stuck inside 40 acres of land, boxed in by a 5 by 5 square of HOA arrogance. That night I paced my porch like a caged animal. Every time I looked at that gate, my fists itched. But I knew better than to cut it down. That's exactly what Natalia wanted, a reason to drag me into court, bleed me dry with fines and legal fees until I had no choice but to sell. So I did what I do best. I thought like a firefighter. You don't charge headfirst into flames without a plan. You study the smoke, find the weak points, and attack where the fire can't fight back. The next morning I called Marcus Bell, my friend, the real estate broker. Marcus is the kind of guy who can find the deed to a chicken coop buried under 50 years of courthouse dust. If anyone could sniff out the truth behind that little patch of land, it was him. When he picked up, I didn't even say hello. Marcus, find me everything you can on the 5x5 lot at the mouth of Willow Creek Meadows. The HOA claims it. I want to know how they pulled it off. He chuckled. Sounds like Natalia's got you in her sights. Don't worry, Bates. If there's a loophole, I'll find it. While Marcus dug through records, the HOA ramped up the pressure. Notices showed up daily, each more ridiculous than the last. One accused me of visual pollution. Another claimed my cows were unlicensed livestock. I tacked them all to the barn wall like trophies. Every piece of paper was fuel for the fire. But the worst part wasn't the letters, it was the fence itself. Every time I tried to leave, I had to stare at that locked gate, that smug sign declaring private HOA property, no trespassing. It was like living under occupation prisoners in my own home. Neighbors started whispering. Some pitied me, others laughed behind their hands. Nobody beats an HOA, one of them muttered at the feed store. They'll bury you in paperwork until you sell. I just smiled. Let them think I was beaten. Because while Natalia was busy celebrating her shiny new gate, Marcus called with news that made my blood hum. Bates, he said, voice low and urgent, I found something. That 5x5 square they bought, it's not the only access point to your land. There's another strip. Tiny. Forgotten. Owned by an old man who probably doesn't even remember he has it. And it leads straight to the county road. I nearly dropped the phone. A back door. Natalia thought she'd caged me in, but she didn't know about the hole in her own trap. Right then and there, I decided I wouldn't just fight the HOA. I'd flip the board. If Natalia wanted to play games with land and paper, fine. I'd beat her at her own game. As I hung up the phone, I looked out across the pasture at that gleaming fence. And for the first time since this mess started, I didn't see a prison. I saw an opportunity. If there's one thing I learned from years as a firefighter, it's this. Every building has an exit. You just have to find it. A window, a stairwell, a hidden hatch in the roof, it doesn't matter how locked down things look. There's always a way out. Turns out land works the same way. When Marcus Bell, my broker buddy, called about that forgotten strip, my pulse kicked like I was back in the firehouse hearing the alarm bell. A lifeline. An escape. More than that, an opening to flip this whole mess on its head. The property he dug up was barely a sliver. 10 feet wide, running along the back edge of Willow Creek Meadows like someone had sliced the earth with a razor and then forgotten about it. It stretched from my pasture to the county road, a skinny ribbon of dirt with weeds taller than a man. According to county records, it belonged to an old fellow named Milton Graves, who'd inherited it from his father back in the 1952. Milton had moved to Arizona years ago, and from what Marcus could tell, he hadn't paid much attention to it since. Thing is, Marcus explained, nobody realized this strip never got absorbed into the subdivision plat. HOA owns their little square out front, sure, but this one, it's free and clear. Graves has the deed. And if you buy it, Bates, you've got yourself another gate. I didn't even let him finish. Make the call. I'll buy it. Today. Marcus laughed. That's what I like to hear. I'll handle the paperwork. Just have your checkbook ready. By the end of the week, I was standing ankle-deep in weeds on my brand-new piece of property, holding a deed with my name printed bold as daylight. I kicked aside an old rusted can, squinted down the strip to where it met the county road, and grinned. Natalia thought she'd caged me in. Instead, she'd built me a shortcut. Of course, a piece of paper doesn't cut a path. I brought out my cousin Travis with his backhoe, and together we carved a clear lane wide enough for a truck. We put in a gravel bed, laid some posts, and slapped up a maintenance shed at the mouth of the path, half storage, half symbol. On the inside wall, I hung a big brass hook. And from that hook, I hung the fattest, meanest-looking key I could find dangling in the sunlight like bait. Think Natalia will notice? Travis asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Oh, she'll notice, I said, chuckling. I'll make sure of it. The timing couldn't have been better. Willow Creek Meadows was hosting their summer picnic, one of those forced smile HOA events where they hand out hot dogs and brag about how the neighborhood is award-winning. Natalia would be there, of course, presiding like a queen in a sundress and pearls. And I had an invitation of my own making. I strolled up the path that afternoon wearing my dirtiest jeans boots caked in mud and my John Deere cap pulled low. The HOA folks shifted uncomfortably as I crossed their manicured lawn. Natalia spotted me instantly. Well, well, Mr. Bates, she purred, stepping forward with her trademark smirk. I'm surprised you came. Did you finally decide to join the community? I reached into my pocket, fished out the oversized key, and dangled it from one finger. Sunlight glinted off the brass. A hush fell over the crowd. "Funny thing about fences," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "They only work if you're the one holding the keys. And wouldn't you know it, I've got my own now." Natalia's smile twitched. "What exactly are you implying?" I leaned in close, dropped my voice so only she could hear. "I bought the back strip, run straight to the county road. Built myself a shed, hung this key where anyone can see it. You didn't trap me, Natalia. You gave me the best excuse in the world to cut you out of the picture." She stiffened eyes, narrowing. "That's impossible. That land was forgotten, I finished for her. But not anymore, it's mine. And now your shiny new fence, it's just decoration." I slipped the key back into my pocket and tipped my cap. Behind me I could hear whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. "He bought the back land. Is that legal?" "Of course it's legal, he owns it." Natalia turned on her heel, retreating to her board members, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes. For the first time, the queen of clipboards realized her throne had a crack. The next few days were almost comical. HOA board members loitered near my new access road, snapping pictures and muttering. Natalia herself drove past slowly in her luxury SUV, glaring at my maintenance shed like it was an enemy fortress. They couldn't stop me, and they knew it. So they changed tactics. The letters didn't stop, but now they came with added venom. "Failure to comply will result in litigation. Your continued defiance damages property values. We will pursue all legal remedies." Natalia's signature grew larger, angrier, as if size could make her threats more real. But here's the thing. Every angry letter she sent me was another nail in her own coffin. Every drone that buzzed overhead was another line in my growing file of harassment. And every smug look she gave me only strengthened my resolve. By the time I parked my truck at the county courthouse to file official access rights through my backstrip, I was smiling ear to ear. The clerk stamped the paperwork, slid it across the counter, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Bates. Looks like you've got yourself a legal back door." A legal back door. I liked the sound of that. That night I sat on my porch sipping whiskey, watching the sun sink behind Natalia's shiny new fence. My goats wandered freely, my tractor rumbled out the back gate onto the county road, and for the first time in weeks I felt the knot in my chest loosen. But deep down I knew this wasn't over. Natalia wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She'd see my move as a challenge, and I had no doubt she'd come at me harder, dirtier, meaner. Good. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that I was already thinking bigger than a back door. I wasn't just going to outlast the HOA. I was going to own it. I should have known Natalia Crawford wouldn't take the backdoor trick lying down. The woman had the stubbornness of a snapping turtle and the charm of a loan collector. For a brief moment, I enjoyed watching her shiny fence become nothing more than lawn art while my trucks rolled freely out the back strip I'd bought. But the honeymoon didn't last. The HOA came back swinging. It started with what they called security patrols. Now, Willow Creek Meadows wasn't exactly Gotham City. The most dangerous thing that ever happened there was a kid's lemonade stand running out of sugar. But suddenly, I had men in polos and reflective vests rolling onto my property in golf carts, clipboards at the ready, jotting down infractions. One Tuesday morning, I was loading hay bales onto my flatbed when two of them drove right up the gravel lane, parking like they owned the place. "Sir," one of them said, voice nasal and smug, "your property is subject to Willow Creek HOA's noise ordinances. This machinery exceeds our decibel standards." I set the bale down slow, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and gave them the kind of stare that used to make rookies at the firehouse quake. "You're on private farmland. Get your carts off my drive before I hook a tow chain to them." The other one piped up, "Mr. Bates, under HOA reclassification statutes, your property may soon be designated as shared community green space. In that case, this equipment would be prohibited." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the hay. Reclassification. The only thing you're classifying is how fast you'll end up face first in a manure pile if you don't leave. They retreated, but not before scribbling notes furiously, like they were writing up tickets for the sheriff. That night, another letter arrived, this one signed personally by Natalia. "Effective immediately, your property is under review for community integration. Continued violations will result in mandatory hearings." Integration. Review, hearings. Words dressed up to sound legal but empty as a scarecrow in winter. Still, I could see the strategy bury me under enough nonsense paperwork and maybe I'd fold. I called my cousin Ethan Rowe, the sharpest land use attorney I knew. Ethan had the patience of a saint, but when it came to property law, he fought like a wolf. I handed him the stack of notices, and his eyes glittered like he'd just found gold. "These aren't just overreach," he said, flipping through the pages. "This is harassment, and half of it wouldn't stand up 5 minutes in court." "Good," I said. "Then let's make sure they know it." The very next day, Ethan drafted a cease and desist letter on thick legal paper that made my old printer wheeze just looking at it. We mailed copies to Natalia and every board member. In plain English, it warned them to stay off my land or face charges of trespass and intimidation. For a moment, I thought the storm might calm. But Natalia wasn't the type to back down when cornered. She doubled down instead. The HOA started weaponizing their newsletters. One issue featured a glossy cover photo of Willow Creek's pristine lawns with a caption about upholding standards. Inside, a not-so-subtle article complained about adjacent properties lowering values with unsightly practices. They didn't name me, but they didn't have to. Half the neighborhood already called my place the Bates eyesore. I pinned that newsletter to my barn wall, right next to the letters. My little trophy collection of HOA foolishness was growing nicely. The next move was sneakier. One evening, I caught a group of board members parked across the road, cameras aimed at my cattle. I strolled over, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" I asked flatly. One of them, a wiry man with a too-tight tie, sniffed. "Documenting, in case we need proof of non-compliance." I smiled, slow. "Non-compliance, huh? You mean my cows chewing cud? Write that up nice and official. Should make for a riveting case." They packed up quick after that, but not before muttering about reports to the county. The thing was, Natalia still thought this was a one-sided war. She saw me as some stubborn farmer clinging to his land while she wielded rules and regulations like a sword. What she didn't see was the file Ethan and I were building: every trespass, every drone, every empty threat. Piece by piece, I was stacking a bonfire of evidence. And soon Natalia was about to throw gasoline on it. It happened at the next HOA meeting. I went not because I cared what they had to say, but because I wanted to see Natalia's face. She stood at the front of their fancy clubhouse, pearls, gleaming hair, perfect, looking more like a CEO than a neighbor. "As your president," she began, "it is my duty to protect our community from outside threats. One such threat comes from the unregulated property adjacent to our borders. We must take steps to preserve our way of life." Her words dripped honey, but her eyes cut toward me like knives. People in the crowd whispered, heads nodding. A few glanced at me with sympathy, others with suspicion. Then Natalia dropped her bomb. "The board is reviewing a motion to reclassify the Bates farm as common green space under HOA jurisdiction. This will allow us to enforce standards and ensure safety for all." The room erupted. Some clapped, others gasped. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, and let a slow grin spread across my face. Because what Natalia didn't know was that Ethan had already drafted a response that would make her little motion look like a child's drawing on legal paper, and Marcus was still digging, unearthing little parcels of land like buried treasure, each one a potential crack in the HOA's foundation. Natalia thought she had cornered me again, announcing my doom to her loyal followers. But all I saw was desperation. She was trying to paint me as the villain because she knew she couldn't beat me on solid ground. As I left the clubhouse that night, one of the neighbors caught up to me. A middle-aged man named Paul, wearing a faded ball cap, eyes darting nervously. "Bates," he muttered. "Some of us are sick of this. Crawford's gone too far. If you've got a plan, you won't be alone." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Good to know, Paul. Keep your ears open. The best is yet to come." And as I walked back to my truck, I glanced at that shiny clubhouse all lit up against the night sky. Natalia thought she was untouchable in there, backed by rules and neighbors too afraid to speak up. But fences don't last forever, and neither do empires built on arrogance. The thing about a fence is this: it doesn't just keep people out, it keeps people angry. Natalia Crawford's shiny gate wasn't working the way she'd planned. Thanks to the strip of land I'd bought, I could come and go as I pleased. And the more she realized her masterstroke had flopped, the nastier her tactics became. The first sign came at midnight on a Tuesday. I'd just finished a late round of feeding dogs sprawled at my feet when I heard the low rumble of an engine. Not the comforting cough of my tractor or the slow roll of a neighbor's pickup. This was heavier, mechanical. I slipped on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and headed toward the north pasture. There, under the moonlight, a crew of men in hard hats was digging. They had a mini excavator chewing into the dirt, carving what looked like a road across my property. My property. The audacity nearly floored me. I stormed down the slope, flashlight beam cutting through the night. "Hey," I bellowed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of them looked up, startled, but then shrugged like it was no big deal. "Private HOA construction. Approved easement. Just building an access road. Approved by who I snapped. Because last I checked, this land belongs to me. Another guy chewing gum like he owned the place, muttered Board. Said it's common ground now. We're just following orders. I flicked my flashlight onto the fresh survey stakes. Sure enough, bright HOA stickers were slapped onto them. Natalia's fingerprints all over the crime scene. You've got 10 minutes to get off my land, I growled, or I'll let the sheriff decide how legal this little midnight dig island. They hesitated until I racked the shotgun I'd brought along. That did the trick. The excavator sputtered to a stop, and the crew packed up, muttering curses under their breath as they disappeared into the night. But they didn't leave quietly. The next morning, a drone buzzed so low over my barn roof that the horses spooked and nearly broke through the fence. I stepped out onto the porch, shotgun in hand, and tracked it across the sky. It circled twice, lens glinting in the sun, then swooped toward the chicken coop. That was its mistake. One squeeze of the trigger and the drone dropped like a stone, crashing into the dirt in a cloud of feathers and dust. I picked up the shattered mess, tucked it under my arm, and drove it straight to the HOA office. When I slapped the wreckage onto Natalia's desk, she barely blinked. That's destruction of property, Mr. Bates. We'll be billing you for damages. I leaned across the desk until I was close enough to see the reflection of my own rage in her eyes. That's trespassing, Natalia. Next time I won't just shoot the drone. For the first time since this war began, her smile faltered. 2 days later, the HOA escalated again. I woke to the roar of machinery and found a bulldozer plowing a line straight toward my house. On its front, taped to the windshield, was a paper stamped with some kind of building permit. The driver leaned out, hollering over the engine. We're clearing a route for the HOA's private road. Got the paperwork right here. I snatched the sheet from him and scanned it. The county seal looked off. Too clean, too perfect, like it had been pasted on. And the signature belonged to a county inspector who'd retired 5 years ago. I pulled out my phone and called Sheriff Coleman. Sheriff, you better get down here. HOA's trying to bulldoze my pasture with fake permits. He showed up 20 minutes later, lights flashing, boots crunching across the gravel. One look at the bulldozer, one glance at the permit, and his face turned red. This is forgery, he barked at the driver. Step out of the machine. Now. The operator sputtered, I was just hired for the job, I don't care. This bulldozer isn't moving another inch. Within the hour, the bulldozer was chained to a tow truck, the forged paperwork bagged as evidence. Sheriff Coleman clapped me on the shoulder. They crossed a line, Bates. Forging county documents, that's felony territory. I watched Natalia arrive in her SUV, heels clicking furiously as she stormed over. She tried everything, pleading, threatening, even accusing me of sabotage. But Coleman wasn't having it. You're done here, Crawford, he said. Next stunt like this, and I'll haul you in myself. Natalia glared at me like she wanted to burn my farm down with her eyes. And I believed for a moment that she just might try. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every bark from the dogs, made me think of fire. I set up cameras around the barn, floodlights along the driveway, and kept the shotgun within arm's reach. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the cameras caught movement, 2 men creeping toward the stables, one carrying a gas can. My blood ran cold. Arson. I hit the floodlights, dogs barking like mad, and bolted outside. The men froze deer in the headlights, then bolted for the fence. I chased them halfway across the pasture before they scrambled into a waiting SUV and tore off down the road. When I reviewed the footage, the faces were grainy but clear enough. HOA board members. Natalia's loyal foot soldiers. That was the moment everything changed for me. Before, it had been letters, fences, and smug words. Annoying, insulting, sure, but this was criminal. They weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to destroy me. And I'll tell you something about men who've pulled strangers out of burning buildings. Once you threaten fire around me, you've already lost. I backed up the footage, printed copies, and tucked them into my growing file. Natalia thought she was burying me with paperwork, but in truth I was building a mountain to crush her with. The HOA had crossed into felonies. And once that happens, it's not just a fight between neighbors, it's war with the law. When you've lived through smoke and fire like I have, you know the difference between a scare and a real threat. That grainy footage from my cameras, 2 HOA board members sneaking through the night with a gas can, wasn't just petty intimidation, it was attempted arson. That's felony territory, the kind of crime that leaves scars and graves if you don't stop it quick. The next morning, I drove straight into town with a USB stick full of video clips. Sheriff Coleman was waiting in his office, sipping coffee like it was any other day. I dropped the stick on his desk, and when he clicked play, his jaw tightened. Lord Almighty, he muttered, eyes narrowing. That's Daniels and Kraus. Both sit on the Willow Creek HOA board. Your people, I said flatly. My problem now, he corrected. I'll handle this, Bates. You keep your cool. Keep my cool. Easy enough to say when it wasn't your barn they tried to torch. But I trusted Coleman. He wasn't the kind to look away from felony crimes, even if the suspects wore pressed khakis and HOA badges. Word spread fast. By evening, half the county had heard rumors that Willow Creek's community leaders were caught red-handed with a gas can. Natalia tried to spin it, of course. The HOA newsletter framed it as a misunderstanding during routine property inspection. Misunderstanding my foot. You don't carry kerosene at midnight unless you plan to light something. Then came the fraud. It was a Wednesday morning when a flatbed truck rumbled up my drive hauling another bulldozer. The driver hopped down, clipboard in hand. Got a work order here, he said. HOA approved expansion. Supposed to clear a path for utilities. I yanked the paperwork out of his hand. Same county seal, same signature, except this time I recognized the inspector's name. Problem was he'd retired 6 years ago and now lived in Florida. You boys ever get tired of forging documents? I asked, waving the sheet in the air. The driver blinked. Look, man, I'm just paid to move dirt. If you got a problem, take it up with your HOA. Sheriff Coleman must have had my road on speed dial because 10 minutes later his cruiser came rolling up, lights flashing. He didn't even need to see the paperwork this time. He just pointed at the bulldozer. Shut it down. You're trespassing. The driver muttered something about Natalia, about assurances, but Coleman wasn't hearing it. He slapped evidence tags on the forged permits and called in another tow truck. That made 2 bulldozers seized in 1 week. Natalia must have been bleeding money faster than a busted hydrant. Later that night, I got a call from Ethan, my lawyer cousin. He sounded almost giddy. Bates, this is the gift that keeps on giving. Forged county seals felony, attempted arson felony, trespassing, harassment, illegal construction, the list goes on. We've got enough here to bury the entire board. Not enough yet, I said. Natalia's slippery. She'll blame her cronies, claim ignorance. I need her name on something dirty. Personal. Ethan chuckled, then let her keep digging. Every move she makes puts the rope tighter around her neck. And dig she did. A week later, Natalia sent a letter claiming my entire property was encumbered under a community mortgage agreement. According to her, the HOA held rights to foreclose if I didn't comply with their bylaws. It looked official: watermarks, bank logos, signatures. But the second I handed it to Ethan, he laughed so hard he nearly choked. This is a fake mortgage, he said. Doesn't even list the right loan number. And you paid cash for your farm years ago. They're trying to steal your land with paper that wouldn't fool a freshman law student. Still, Natalia paraded it around Willow Creek, waving copies like a preacher with a Bible. We have legal grounds, she told her followers. The Bates farm is ours to reclaim. That might have rallied her inner circle, but for the average neighbor, it was starting to stink. Folks who once nodded along to her speeches now whispered behind her back. At the diner, I overheard one woman say, if Crawford's willing to fake bank papers, what else is she hiding? Meanwhile, my cameras caught more harassment. Drones buzzing overhead at all hours. Cars idling at the edge of my field, headlights pointed at the barn like they were trying to rattle my animals. One night, someone dumped a pile of trash at my back gate with a note that read, "Join us or leave." I didn't bother to clean it up. I just called Coleman again. Every report added weight to my growing file. Every dirty trick was another nail in Natalia's coffin. But here's where things turned truly bizarre. One evening, as I was checking the fences, I spotted a shadow moving near the edge of my property. Not skulking, not sneaking, just standing there. I walked closer, hand on my holster, until I could make out a woman in a business suit. It was Beatrice Lang, the HOA's own attorney. She looked tired, makeup smudged like she hadn't slept in days. "What do you want, Lang?" I asked. She held out a small black USB stick. "I can't keep covering for them," she said quietly. "Natalia's crossed every line. Emails, forged permits, plans for arson, it's all here. Do with it what you will." I stared at her, half suspecting a trap. Why give this to me? Because when this collapses, and it will, I don't want to go down with her. She shoved the USB into my hand, glanced nervously toward the subdivision, and vanished into the dark. Back on my porch, I plugged the drive into my laptop. What I saw nearly made me whistle out loud. Hundreds of files. Internal emails where Natalia spelled out her plans, fencing me in reclaiming my land, forging documents, even discussing the failed arson attempt. There were receipts for payments to contractors, draft letters to banks, meeting minutes where the board joked about running Bates off his farm. This wasn't just evidence, this was dynamite. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the scales had tipped. Natalia thought she was clever, but her own lawyer had handed me the noose. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flickering screen. My farm smelled of hay and freedom, my goats bleated softly in the distance, and in my hand was the key to ending the HOA's reign once and for all. Natalia wanted a war. Now she was about to get a trial. The thing about fire is that it doesn't stay contained forever. All it needs is oxygen, and suddenly it roars loud enough for the whole town to hear. Natalia Crawford had been playing with matches for months: letters, drones, forged permits, even gasoline cans. And thanks to Beatrice Lang's little USB drive, I now had proof that the HOA wasn't just overreaching. They were criminal. I didn't rush straight to the courthouse. No, I wanted the court of public opinion first. Because once the people turned, Natalia's empire would collapse faster than a hay barn in a tornado. That's where Hannah Reed came in. Hannah was a local reporter, sharp as a tack and hungry for stories that mattered. She'd grown up around here, and she wasn't the type to be intimidated by shiny pearls or HOA bylaws. I called her one morning, told her I had something she'd want to see. She met me on the porch of my farmhouse, notebook and hand eyes bright with curiosity. I poured her a cup of strong coffee and slid the USB across the table. "What's on it?" she asked. "Proof," I said simply. "Everything from arson plots to fake bank papers. Natalia Crawford and her crew have been running Willow Creek like a cartel. It's time folks knew the truth." Hannah plugged the drive into her laptop, brows furrowing as she scrolled. First came the emails about fencing me in, then the payments to contractors for the midnight bulldozer jobs, then the mortgage documents Natalia bragged about. Hannah's lips pressed thin, her pen scratching furiously. "This," she whispered, "this is bigger than a neighborhood spat. This is fraud, extortion, felonies." "Exactly," I said. "And it's not just about me. They'll keep pulling this stunt with anyone who stands in their way, unless someone shines a light on them." Hannah snapped her laptop shut and gave me a grin. "You want a fire, Bates? Let's set one." 2 days later, the front page of the county paper screamed, "HOA gone, rogue internal emails reveal fraud, forgery, and fire plots." Hannah's story laid it all bare: the harassment, the drones, the bulldozers, the forged documents. She didn't just name Natalia, she quoted her line by damning lines straight from the emails. And that was just the start. By afternoon, the story hit local TV. News vans parked along the county road. Reporters huddled by my fence, pointing cameras at the gleaming gate Natalia had once bragged about. They ran footage from my security cameras showing men sneaking around with gas cans. They broadcast Sheriff Coleman's comments about seized bulldozers and forged permits. By nightfall, the video clip had gone viral online. 1 million views, then 2. People from across the country chimed in. "This is insane. HOAs are out of control." "Stand strong, Bates." The pressure cooker blew its lid. Neighbors who once whispered now shouted. A crowd gathered outside the Willow Creek clubhouse, holding signs that read, "Down with Crawford," and "No more HOA tyranny." Someone even brought a big inflatable goat with a banner around its neck, "Team Bates." I'll admit I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Natalia tried to fight back. She called an emergency HOA meeting, striding onto the stage in her pearls and pastel blazer like nothing had changed. Cameras flashed, protesters booed, but she raised her chin and smiled. "These allegations," she declared, voice smooth as butter, "are fabrications. Lies spread by a bitter man unwilling to adapt to community standards. The so-called evidence is taken out of context. We remain committed to order, beauty, and harmony." Her speech might have worked once, but not now. From the back of the crowd, a man shouted, "Order. You tried to burn down his barn," a woman yelled. "What about the fake mortgage papers?" Natalia, another. "We saw the emails." The crowd roared, drowning out her polished words. Hannah was there too, microphone raised, pressing for answers. Natalia faltered for the first time, stammering as sweat beaded her forehead. I stood just outside the cameras, arms crossed, letting her twist in her own noose. It wasn't about shouting louder, it was about letting the truth speak, and the truth was shouting plenty by itself. The HOA board members didn't look much better. Daniels and Kraus, the two caught on video with the gas can, tried to hide in the corner. Others whispered, nervously avoiding Natalia's glare. Beatrice, the attorney who'd given me the USB, sat stone-faced, refusing to defend her boss. By the end of the night, protesters had surrounded the clubhouse. Police were called in not to protect me, but to keep Natalia from being mobbed by her own neighbors. For the first time, she looked small, fragile, beaten, but I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I stood on the steps of the courthouse with Ethan at my side. Cameras snapped reporters, shouted questions. I held up a thick folder, copies of every email, every forged permit, every drone photo, every letter. My name is Colin Bates, I said into the microphones. I'm a farmer, a neighbor. And I've been targeted by an HOA that thought they could steal my land with lies, intimidation, and crime. Today I'm filing a lawsuit against Willow Creek Meadows HOA and its president Natalia Crawford. And I won't stop until every single one of them is held accountable. The crowd erupted in cheers. Signs waved reporters. Shouted cameras rolled. I saw Paul, the quiet neighbor who'd once whispered support, smiling in the back. This time he wasn't whispering. He was shouting right along with the rest. Natalia thought she could isolate me, bury me in paperwork, and wear me down. Instead, she'd united the whole county against her. The oxygen had hit the fire, and now there was no putting it out. The public outrage was like a storm ripping shingles off Natalia Crawford's perfect little clubhouse. The protests, the headlines, the viral videos, it all stripped away her power faster than she could glue it back on. But I wasn't interested in just surviving her HOA empire. I wanted to dismantle it piece by piece until the very ground under her manicured lawn belonged to me. That's when Marcus Bell, my real estate bloodhound, called me with the kind of news that makes a man grin like a coyote at a chicken coop. Bates, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement, I've been combing through county records. Guess what I found? The HOA doesn't own all the land around their clubhouse like they think they do. There are slivers, odd little parcels left over from old surveys, and they're still in private hands. Private hands, I asked, leaning forward. Yup. Tiny strips, one under their fountain, another cutting across half the parking lot, even a narrow band along the clubhouse porch. They look like nothing, but legally, they're everything. And get this, most of them are owned by one guy, Vernon Hale. He's pushing 80 lives out on the edge of town, doesn't care much for the HOA. If you make him the right offer, those parcels are yours. I didn't even hesitate. Set up the meeting. A week later, I was sitting across from Vernon, in his cluttered living room, the smell of pipe tobacco hanging in the air. He was a wiry old man with eyes like sharpened steel. I never did trust those HOA folks, he muttered, flipping through the paperwork Marcus laid out. Bunch of busybodies telling folks how tall their grass can be. If you want these scraps of land, son, you can have them. Been more trouble than they're worth. I slid the check across the table. I'll make them worth your while. His laugh cracked like dry wood. Hell, Bates, if this means Crawford's bunch has to pay you rent to park their own cars, I'll give you a discount. We shook hands, and just like that, the heart of Willow Creek Meadows had a new landlord, me. I wasted no time. Signs went up overnight. Private property. Trespassers prosecuted. Right there in the middle of the HOA parking lot, smack under their prized fountain, even bolted to the clubhouse steps. Residents arriving for their morning yoga class nearly fainted when they saw them. Natalia stormed into my driveway that afternoon, pearls rattling against her neck as she slammed her SUV door. "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "You can't just buy pieces of our community." I leaned on my truck, calm as a pond at dawn. "Funny. That's exactly what you did to me. Difference is, I'm better at it." Her face turned crimson. "We'll file an injunction. You'll never get away with this." She did file, of course. A stack of papers thicker than a Bible demanding the court nullify my purchases. But Ethan shredded them like tissue paper in front of Judge Ames. "Your Honor," Ethan explained smoothly, "my client has purchased these parcels legally. Deeds are clear, taxes are paid, ownership is indisputable. The HOA may be embarrassed, but embarrassment is not grounds for injunction." Judge Ames didn't even blink. Motion denied. Natalia's expression when the gavel dropped could have curdled milk. And the hits kept coming. Because it wasn't enough to own the ground under her feet, I wanted the walls around her throne too. So Marcus kept digging, uncovering that several HOA board members had grown tired of Natalia's antics. Their homes had dropped in value since the scandal broke. Their reputations were toast. And you know what HOA membership is backed by shares? Votes, influence. Quietly, one by one, I bought them out. Sometimes it was cash, sometimes a handshake deal to help them move out of town. Either way, Natalia never saw it coming. While she strutted around at board meetings, waving her gavel like a queen, the foundation of her power was slipping away into my hands. The more land I bought, the more leverage I gained. By midsummer, I controlled the parking lot, the fountain, half the clubhouse steps, and enough HOA shares to make my voice unavoidable. That's when Natalia tried her boldest scam yet. One morning, a courier arrived at my farm with what looked like foreclosure papers. According to them, my land had been mortgaged under the HOA's community covenant, and since I wasn't paying dues, they were initiating foreclosure. I almost laughed. Almost. Except forgery wasn't funny. The documents bore the logo of First National Bank, except the bank manager was an old friend of mine, and when I drove down there with the papers, he whistled. These are fake baits. No mortgage on record. This is bank fraud. Bank fraud. Another felony to tack onto Natalia's list. By now, Sheriff Coleman had a whole folder labeled Crawford, and each week it got fatter. Meanwhile, the public tide had fully turned. More neighbors defected, joining the protests. Signs sprouted on lawns. End the HOA and fire Crawford. Social media buzzed with memes of Natalia behind cartoon prison bars. Even local radio stations played sound bites of her speeches, mocking them between country songs. And me, I just kept smiling, buying, building. Every new deed I signed was another nail in the coffin. Every neighbor who shook my hand was another soldier in the quiet revolution. By the time Natalia realized what was happening, it was too late. The Willow Creek Meadows, HOA, her pride, her fortress, her empire wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. And I was ready to use it to finish what she started. Because Natalia thought she could bury me with fences and bylaws. Instead, I was about to bury her with her own crown. By the time summer settled in, Natalia Crawford wasn't smiling much anymore. Her pearls still clinked at every meeting, and she still wore those pastel blazers like armor, but the sparkle in her eyes had dulled. She knew the walls were closing in. She just didn't know how fast. Because while she scrambled to hold on to her little kingdom, I was already king. Between the deeds Marcus unearthed and the shares I bought quietly out from under her allies, I held the majority stake in Willow Creek Meadows HOA. All that was left was the final hammer to drop the courts. Sheriff Coleman called me one Tuesday afternoon. Bates, the DA's ready to move. We've got arson forged permits, bank fraud harassment. You bring that USB drive to the courthouse and Natalia's reign is done. I didn't need to be asked twice. The courtroom was packed that morning. Neighbors filled every bench, reporters lined the back wall, and cameras waited outside like vultures. Natalia swept in late chin, high-flanked by her cronies. Daniels and Krause, the gas can duo, looked pale, sweat beating at their temples. Beatrice Lang, her own lawyer, sat stiff as a stone, eyes forward, lips tight. When Judge Franklin Ames entered the room, snapped to silence. A gavel cracked. Case of Willow Creek Meadows, HOA, versus Colin Bates. Also, the State of County versus Willow Creek Meadows, HOA, and President Natalia Crawford. Ethan, my cousin and lawyer, rose first. He started calm, deliberate, handing over documents, laying out the timeline, the fence, the illegal road, the drones, the bulldozers, the arson attempt. Every word stacked like bricks in a wall, solid and undeniable. Then came the bombshell. Your Honor, Ethan said, we submit Exhibit G, a digital drive containing internal HOA emails obtained legally through counsel. These files include explicit instructions from President Crawford to falsify permits, fabricate mortgage documents, and authorize harassment against my client. Gasps rippled through the room. Judge Ames leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Miss Crawford, do you contest the authenticity of these documents? Natalia stood, her voice sharp but cracking at the edges. These are taken out of context. Jokes among colleagues, nothing more. Ethan clicked the screen to life. Email after email scrolled across for all to see. Natalia's words in black and white. Make it look official. Run Bates off his land. If the fire scare doesn't work, we'll bury him in paper. Her face drained of color. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, holding up the forged building permits and the fake mortgage papers. We've verified these signatures. Stolen seals. Counterfeit logos. This is felony-level fraud, Your Honor. The gavel slammed. Enough. Judge Ames's voice echoed. This court finds the evidence overwhelming. The injunctions filed by the HOA are dismissed with prejudice. The Bates farm remains free and independent. Furthermore, criminal charges against Miss Crawford and the Willow Creek HOA board will proceed immediately. Natalia sputtered, turning to her cronies for support, but none came. Daniels and Krause were already in handcuffs, led out by deputies. Beatrice Lang didn't even look at her. The woman who once ran a neighborhood with an iron fist was suddenly just another defendant trembling in a pastel blazer. The judge continued. Additionally, this court orders the Willow Creek Meadows HOA to pay damages to Mr. Bates in the amount of $500,000. This shall cover harassment, trespass, and attempted property devaluation. Court is adjourned. The gavel cracked once more, and with it, Natalia's empire shattered. Reporters swarmed outside as deputies escorted her away in cuffs. Protesters cheered signs, waving high, "Freedom wins." Someone even lit sparklers in the daylight, shouting, "Down with the HOA." But my favorite part, that came later at the HOA's so-called emergency board meeting. By then, I owned controlling interest. The clubhouse was half-empty, members, too ashamed or scared to show. I stood at the podium, looking out over the few pale faces that remained. "As of today," I said, voice carrying through the hollow room, "this HOA belongs to me. And my first act as president," I paused, letting the silence thicken, "is to fire every last one of you who ever used this board as a weapon." One by one I called their names. Each fired. Each stripped of their little titles. Natalia wasn't there to hear it. She was still cooling her heels in county lockup, but I almost wished she'd been. Then came the finale. "Second act as president," I declared. "Effective immediately, the Willow Creek Meadows HOA is dissolved. Permanently. No more bylaws, no more fines, no more harassment." For a beat, the room was silent. Then from the back, applause broke out. It grew spread until even neighbors I'd barely spoken to were cheering. That evening, under a golden sunset, I climbed into my tractor, fired up the engine, and drove straight at the fence Natalia had built across my driveway months before. The steel groaned, snapped, and collapsed into the dirt as the crowd of neighbors hollered and clapped. The gate that was meant to trap me was now rubble under my tires. I parked, stepped down, and raised my hands. "Folks," I shouted, "this farm is free, and so are you." And for the first time in a long while, Willow Creek Meadows wasn't divided by fences or fear. It was united in laughter, in cheers, and in the sight of Natalia Crawford's empire reduced to dust. Because in the end, the HOA didn't own me. I owned it. And firing them all was the sweetest harvest I'd ever reaped. Looking back now, I can't help but marvel at the irony. Natalia Crawford and her board built a fence to trap me, but it ended up being the bars of their own prison. They thought paper threats and intimidation could break me. But here's the truth: no matter how shiny their clipboards, no HOA on earth can outmatch grit, persistence, and a little bit of smart thinking. What I learned through this fight is something I want you to take with you: bullies only win when we play by their rules. The moment you stop reacting out of fear and start acting with purpose, their power crumbles. Sometimes the best revenge isn't raising your voice, it's outsmarting the ones who tried to silence you. And here's the most important part. Victory isn't just about tearing down fences. It's about building something better in their place. For me, that was reclaiming my land, restoring peace to my farm, and reminding this community that freedom isn't granted by an HOA, it's defended by people willing to stand up when it counts. So if you've ever felt trapped by neighbors, by rules, or by anyone who thought they could control you, remember this: you are stronger than the fence they put around you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever faced an HOA nightmare? I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss the next battle.